In 2012, a college student was found inside her apartment, and it was clear someone had taken her life. The disturbing crime took place under circumstances that made no sense. No forced entry, a strange, handwritten note, and a timeline full of gaps. The case of Faith Hedgepeth became one of North Carolina's most puzzling true crime stories, surrounded by secrecy, conflicting details, and years without answers. And it would take nearly a decade for the truth to even begin to surface, and even now, questions still remain. Faith Hedgepeth was born in Warren County, North Carolina, and within a year of her birth, her parents got divorced, and she went on to live with her mom in Hollister and then Warrenton. Faith was part of a Hollywa-Saponi Native American tribe, and growing up, she was defined as a gentle and brilliant young girl. Faith was very studious. She was an honor student throughout high school and also participated in cheerleading, clubs, and various school events. Because Faith was a straight-A student, she was granted the Gates Millennium Scholarship for attending the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Faith was the first person in her family to graduate from college, and she was really excited. Her dad had attended that same university, but for some reason, he didn't graduate. But her family was very happy for her to actually attempt to complete college. Faith had different ambitions. She either wanted to become a teacher or do something in the field of pediatrics. She was good at studying, but college classes were hard for her, and things were a bit difficult for Faith to manage, but she pulled through for 2 years. After attending university for 2 years, Faith decided to take a break from her studies for the 2012 spring break. And during that time, she was living in an off-campus apartment at the Hawthorne at the View complex between Chapel Hill and Durham, on the line between Durham and Orange counties. She lived in that apartment with her friend Karina Rosario and Karina's boyfriend Eric Decoy Jones. Now, the apartment had little to no security cameras, which you'll see later on became a very big hurdle in this case. It was definitely not a safe place for college students, or really anyone for that matter, but Faith didn't have any problems during the time that she stayed here. Faith was due to move to a different place once her fall semester started anyway, so she was just spending her time with her roommate and best friend and making the most out of the situation at hand. Speaking of roommates, Karina and Eric's relationship was not going well. Eric was often violent towards Karina. And at one point after Karina had ended the relationship, Eric moved out of the apartment. But sometime later, in June of 2012, Eric broke into the girl's apartment not once but twice, even though Karina had changed the locks the first time around. So you can tell what kind of guy Eric was. He wanted Karina all to himself, but the relationship was abusive and often explosive. He would leave, but then he would come back and beg Karina to take him back, and if Karina didn't oblige, then he would resort to terrorizing her. This forced Karina to get a protective order against Eric, and the main driving force was Faith herself. She didn't want her friend trapped in an abusive relationship, and if she could help in any way she could, then she would, and that was just the type of person that Faith was. She was caring, and she was very selfless. And Karina got that protective order, and now Eric was to stay away from the apartment and both of the girls. But did he take that well? Obviously not. He actually grew even more furious, and this time, his anger was targeted at Faith. In his head, Faith was the one who drove him away from Karina by persuading her to get that protective order. And this didn't go down well at all. Eric threatened Faith over the phone that unless she convinced Karina to get back together with him, he would seriously harm her. And it's clear to see this situation escalated far quicker than anyone could have expected. Faith was just trying to look after her friend, and now she was also on the receiving end of Eric's verbal violence. Well, as scary as it was, that was that. And ever since the court order was issued, Eric hadn't pulled any weird stunts. But things were far from over, especially for Faith. September 6th, 2012 was a regular day full of errands and work for Faith. She was working 2 jobs and studying at the same time. In the evening, a little before 6 p.m., Faith attended a sorority rush event for the campus chapter of Alpha Pi Omega, a historically Native American sorority. Faith wanted to join the sorority badly. The event went well, and then an hour later at 7:15 p.m., Faith left the event to go to the college library to work on a paper. Faith went to Davis Library with Karina, and the two studied and got their work done, and phone records show that Faith was having a text conversation with her dad between 8:30 and 9. They were just chatting about Faith's day and how the sorority event had gone, and Faith even left the library at one point, leaving Karina alone, and then she returned, and at around 11:30 p.m. the girls decided to call it a day and go back home. But the girls were feeling like going to a few bars to let loose after a busy day of working and studying. So half an hour after the two got home, Faith and Karina made their way to The Thrill, a nightclub in downtown Chapel Hill. Now Faith was 19 at the time, but this club allowed underage drinking and dancing, so the girls were in the clear. That's a whole topic for another time, but for now we'll just take it as it is. And CCTV showed the girls walking into the club at around 12:40 a.m. and they were drinking, dancing, and after some time Karina wasn't feeling good. Her stomach hurt a lot, so the girls left the club after about 90 minutes. Again, CCTV cameras showed Karina and Faith leaving the club a little after 2 a.m. An hour later at 3 a.m., Faith and Karina had returned home, and a downstairs neighbor had heard some loud banging and slamming coming from upstairs. It was as if a heavy backpack had been dropped or furniture was just being overturned. The woman downstairs thought that it was weird at first, but after a while, the ruckus stopped, so she just went back to bed as it was late. Now, from this point on, whatever happened is told through Karina's perspective, and cell phone and electronic activity, just so you know. See, Faith's Facebook account was accessed right after the girls returned home, and then a text message from Faith's phone was sent to another one of Karina's ex-boyfriends by the name of Brandon Edwards. The message read, "Hey B, can you please come over? Rosario needs you now more than ever. You know. Please let her know you care." This text was sent around 3:40 a.m. At 4:16 a.m., Brandon replied to the text asking who the sender was, so it can be gathered that this Brandon guy didn't actually know Faith's number. And anyway, Karina's phone records also showed that she was calling Brandon at the same time, and then she called a man by the name of Jordan McCrary, who was a soccer player at their school, and she told him to come and pick her up. At around 4:30 a.m., according to Karina, she left a sleeping Faith at their apartment. But what was so weird was that she left the door unlocked. The front door of the house. If you're leaving, why would you leave a door unlocked when your friend is inside sleeping? Mind you, it's literally a place where there are no security cameras. What was going through Karina's mind? Was she just so out of it that she genuinely didn't remember to lock the door? Or was it something else? Well, from that point on, Karina was picked up by Jordan, who took her to another friend's house on West Longview Street in Chapel Hill. Karina told the police that she arrived there at about 4:30 a.m., and Karina had plans to spend the night there. Well, the next morning, on September 13th, at around 10:30 a.m., Karina tried calling Faith multiple times. She wanted her to come and pick her up, but Faith wasn't answering her phone. This was when Karina called another one of her and Faith's friends, Marisol Rangel, who ultimately took Karina back to her and Faith's apartment. The two arrived a little before 11 a.m., and they called for Faith. And usually by this point, Faith would be up, but right now, the house was silent. The door was still unlocked, and the girls walked in and made a beeline for Faith's bedroom. And when they opened the door, the scene in front of the girls traumatized them for life. Faith was found on the floor by the bed, and the whole room looked like the aftermath of a very violent struggle. Faith was partially disrobed, and her body was wrapped in a quilt. Karina was the one who called emergency services and the police in tears. She just left Faith sleeping in the bed the night before, but now she was gone. The police immediately swarmed the apartment where Faith was found unresponsive. Now, some sources state that the room Faith was found in was her room, and others state that Faith was found in Karina's room, but regardless, the crime scene was a bedroom, and it was horrifying. Faith had endured a very bad attack, and the injuries were the result of said attack, and right beside her body by the bed, the possible murder weapon was found, and it was an empty Bacardi rum bottle. There were fingerprints and DNA on the neck of the bottle, and it looked like it was used to carry out the attack on Faith. And now, judging by the state that Faith's body was found in, a perverse motive was also suggested, but when the autopsy was done, that was ruled out, since the examiners couldn't find any evidence of the sort. And speaking of the autopsy, the injuries that Faith sustained were severe, and her ultimate cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. While scoping the room, the police also found something pretty peculiar, and it was a handwritten note written with a ballpoint pen on the bottom part of a food takeout bag. And the note read in all caps, "I'm not stupid, jealous," followed with a few profanities directed at Faith. But the interesting thing was that the note was clean. It was not mottled in red stains like the rest of the room was, and this led to the assumption that the note was written before the crime was committed, or it was written away from the crime scene, which suggests that the attacker stuck around for some time after the murder. And this was really weird and an unsettling scene. Someone had murdered Faith and left a very rageful yet cryptic note by her body. What was going on? Why leave a note for a victim that's no longer even alive to read it? The whole situation was getting stranger by the minute. Even though there were no security cameras in the area where Faith lived with Karina, the crime rate was relatively low. Murders and unsettling incidents like these didn't happen. Faith's murder led to the beginning of the largest homicide investigation in the history of North Carolina, which is honestly unbelievable. But this whole note thing and every single detail about this case were not made public in the beginning. The records were sealed at the order of a court, and it remained that way for 2 whole years, and not even Faith's family knew about the things that were discovered in that apartment. The records were so private that initially Faith's cause of death wasn't even made public. Her family knew nothing about what happened to Faith, and they remained clueless for over 2 years. It wasn't until July of 2014 that the records were unsealed and eventually made public. Now, this wasn't routine police policy in Chapel Hill, so we don't actually know why the records were sealed in the first place, but it's still bizarre nonetheless. But once the investigation started, the police had their list of suspects, and the first person they wanted to talk to was none other than Karina's abusive and volatile ex, Eric. He had openly threatened Faith since she was the one who persuaded Karina to get that protective order against him. So there was a potential motive here. But what was even more unsettling was the fact that Eric had said some weird things the night before Faith's murder. He had texted a friend or acquaintance of his asking for forgiveness for what he was about to do. And later he posted that same thing on Twitter. And 3 days after that, he changed his Facebook profile banner to read, "Dear Lord, forgive me for all my sins and the sins I may commit today. Protect me from the girls who don't deserve me and the ones that wish me dead today." This was weird. The timing was unnerving, and what he said didn't sit right with anyone. Well, the police called Eric in for questioning, and they waited for a DNA sample from him. And at first he resisted, but he did end up providing that sample. See, on Faith's body, under her fingernails, as well as around the room, DNA was found, and it all belonged to the same person. But here comes the shocker. Eric, as suspicious as he seemed to the police, wasn't the one who committed the crime. His DNA didn't match that found at the crime scene. And it was following this revelation that he was excluded from the suspect list. Next, the police checked phone records and Faith's recent activity, and they came across texts from Brandon, an ex of Faith's, as well as every single man she interacted with when she was at the Thrill with Karina. Everyone provided DNA samples and alibis, and they checked out. None of the men Faith interacted with or talked to at the time of the murder was the perpetrator. While all of this was going on, several vigils were held in remembrance of Faith, and a reward of $29,000 was set up by the apartment complex and the Haliwa-Saponi tribe for the arrest and credible information on this case. And later on, the office of the governor at the time also added another $10,000 to that existing reward money. Faith's family was left devastated. They lost their daughter, the one who was bound to do amazing things in life and was so close to achieving her dreams and graduating. But now everything had stopped, and the only evidence in Faith's case was the 911 call that Karina made, that handwritten note, and a recorded and distorted phone conversation. The 911 call made by Karina was all sorts of weird. And this was brought to light when News and Observer reported that Tom Gasparoli took interest in the case and dove deep into the extensive details. Karina's crying in the 911 call was seeming pretty unnatural, and according to Tom, it doesn't even sound like Karina either. And if anything, it sounds more similar to Marisol's voice. Remember, the girl who was friends with Faith and the one who gave Karina a lift home before Faith was discovered. Tom pointed out that Karina was hesitant to give her name to the operator and didn't even say Faith's name once in the call. She also is hesitant to touch Faith's body or follow any instructions from the operator. One thing that I personally also find weird with this call is the fact that Karina told the operator that it looked like someone else had been in the room. How could she focus on the room and how it looks when her friend is literally lying there on the bed, lifeless? In most cases, the callers are usually just laser focused on the victim and they try everything they can to help or revive them. But Karina instead focused on the room and said there were things that weren't there before, and it really looked like someone else had been there. Why was she pressing this detail so much? And again, I might be reading too much into this, but it was just weird to hear this. But then, the handwritten note. A handwriting specialist, Peggy Wallace, studied that note, and she determined that the note had likely been written by someone using their non-dominant hand. Like the writer wanted to make sure to obscure or disguise their own handwriting so as to not get caught. Now, I don't know if the police have conducted any handwriting analysis on this note, or if they've taken everyone's handwriting into account. If they have, then maybe that just hasn't been made public. But this note sounds like it was written by someone who had a lot of rage. Towards Faith? Well, we don't know, because what was the point of this note? Was it to throw off the investigation, or was it really important? Also, and this is just my assumption, but I think this note was probably written by a woman. I don't know how to explain it, but it just sounds like it could be written by a woman. I could be wrong, but I just felt like pointing it out. The choice of words feels really specific and not like something a man would write out of rage. But again, it's purely opinion, not fact. But lastly, a phone conversation, which was given to the police by a friend of Faith's, surfaced, and it seemed like it was recorded the night before the murder. But the timeline is a bit blurry in this one. The timestamp and music in the background of the call pins the conversation at the time when the girls were at The Thrill, the nightclub. This recorded phone call sounds like a three-way conversation that was about 3 minutes long, and Faith can be heard along with a male and a female, and it sounded like a very heated verbal altercation between the woman, a man, and Faith. And a distressed Faith could be heard in the background while the male and female voices could be heard facilitating some sort of attack and urging each other to finish the job. The names Eric and Rosie, which is actually Karina's nickname, can also be heard in the call. This call is believed to have been recorded unintentionally when Faith's phone pocket dialed her friend on the night of or the night before the murder. This transcript was also enhanced by an audio expert, Arlo West, and even though Faith's dad believes that this is a recording of Faith's actual murder, months later when the metadata was associated with the calls and it was looked into, it was found that this conversation took place at The Thrill. And while the audio was enhanced, who really knows what they were saying or if they were saying anything at all? So take this information with a grain of salt because the audio is very distorted and we don't know for certain what's being said, what's being done, and all we know for sure is that it did take place at that nightclub. So with all of the evidence in the open, Eric and Karina were suspected in the beginning for attacking and subsequently murdering Faith. And it was unsettling and weird that Karina left the front door unlocked and left Faith alone at home. This detail didn't sit right with anyone. A home is supposed to be a safe place, and to just leave the front door unlocked, and that too late at night, this didn't make sense to investigators. And also the banging or loud thumping noises that were heard by Faith's downstairs neighbor suggest that perhaps Faith was murdered right as she set foot into that house, because after that, the woman heard nothing for the rest of the night. We only have Karina's version of events, and with all of these details coming forward, no one knows who to believe. Also, there's another very crucial piece of information. Remember Jordan McCrary, the person who came to pick Karina up at 4 a.m? Well, he came forward and told the police that when he came to Faith's apartment, Karina looked really upset. and she had a distinct red stain on one of her fingers. Furthermore, a smudge of red stain about 2 inches long, possibly made by a finger, was found in Faith's apartment, in the bathroom where Karina said that she was when she was waiting for Jordan to come and pick her up. This is strange. As difficult as it is to both hear and believe, at this point in the investigation, still, no arrests had been made in Faith's case. Eric's DNA didn't match the crime scene even though everyone was suspicious of him. And we don't know if Karina is still even on the police's radar, especially after these revelations about the stains on her finger on the night of the murder, as well as the one in the bathroom. From the DNA obtained at the crime scene, a criminal profile was made, and it's believed that the perpetrator was a Native American with olive skin tone and black hair. A profile was also made available to the public to ensure that people were on the lookout for anyone who matched that description. But it wasn't until September 16th of 2021, almost 9 years following Faith's murder, that the DNA evidence would finally have a match. See, a 28-year-old man by the name of Miguel Salguero Olivares was arrested for a DUI in Wake County the previous month, and when his DNA was taken and tested in the database, a match popped up. It was the same DNA found on Faith's body and in her room, and Miguel was immediately arrested on first-degree murder charges. He had not been on the police's radar at all. He was a stranger, but the DNA tests placed him at the crime scene. And not only this, but a palm print also matched his, which was found on the murder weapon, the rum bottle. What are the chances that a man had gotten away with murdering Faith for 9 years and got caught because of a DUI? Well, as of present, we don't have any details of a possible motive or Miguel's connection to Faith or what happened that night 9 years ago, but it's progress nonetheless. I just can't help but wonder, with all of these other leads that were followed up on in this case, all these other people who had clear motives, is it really true that a random stranger just so happened to take Faith's life on that fateful night? Something seems off, but investigators are still working around the clock to bring this case to a close. It seems clear we now have our guy, but why? That's the bigger question here, because something just isn't adding up. I can't even imagine how Faith's parents and loved ones must have felt for these last few years. They've been living every day for over a decade with no answers as to why their daughter was stolen from them. The investigation is still underway, and as recently as November of 2024, more serious charges including possession of illegal substances and assault were added to Miguel's sheet. It's taking a lot of time for Faith's case to reach the finish line, but that's because there's so much evidence to go through, 39,000 pages to be exact. The court records also revealed that 30 expert witnesses are expected to be called for the trial by the state. The trial date has been set for September 28th of 2026, whereas Miguel's defense team has filed a motion to test the independent stain found in the bathroom. That filing is believed to either be the foundation for a someone else did it defense, or perhaps the defense is really onto something and they'll try to hone in on the holes in the case. Faith's family is hopeful that they will get justice for their daughter, and the perpetrator will finally be punished for what they did to Faith. But it seems like they have a little bit more waiting to do for that satisfying end. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Kathleen Moore, Mandy Mangan-Wolk, Desiree Von Hollywood, Janine Silas, and Stronger Than Sepsis. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you'll gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public. It's a great way to support the channel, and I really appreciate those of you that have decided to do that. If you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find a link down in the description. And don't forget, True Crime Stories t-shirts are also now available. You can grab one of those from a link down in the description as well. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered. And don't forget to subscribe. It's totally free and just keeps you up to date with all my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.